All right, so again, I'm gonna hope this doesn't take most of the class time, but I don't want to do this so quickly to where you don't get a grasp of the overall process of working this up, because this is gonna, it isn't done quick necessarily. But I'm gonna start like I would anything else, in the sense that I get a general underdrawing, thinking of the head as one big mass into the neck. Sort of like I would with a still life, adjusting accordingly. And making a quick reference to that center line of the head, right through the center of the nose, just to set up my perspective that I'll eventually be measuring and correcting. I'm kind of doing a three-quarter view to kind of touch on the issues I was talking about, where things are relative based on your perspective. I'm going to reference the glasses in the underdrawing, like I was saying earlier, thinking about them as if they are part of the head like anything else. And what I'm not worrying about at this stage is whether things are perfect or accurate yet. I'm just looking for a starting point. I'm using a B carbon pencil, like we did earlier in the semester.
From where to where?
I'm doing from the chin right now to the end of the glasses on the opposite side. So I'm thinking of measurements that are over the whole mass of the head rather than isolated sections. And I will be doing a self-portrait demo later, like I say, in a week or two, where I'll set up the light a little different, but I am doing it for the lighting situation similar to what you guys would be doing next class on Wednesday. Every measurement I'm doing, I'm still keeping in the back of my mind that these are initial measurements, meaning I'll change them as the drawing goes forward when I find I need the adjustment. Making my marks light because there's going to be inevitable adjustments. And let me know if whenever you need to break. Sort of like some of those examples, for quite a while it'll just be major structural references that are in the drawing, way before more smaller forms get referenced.
locking in with geometric forms to get the plane?
Sort of, yeah. Yeah, it's what a lot of these marks are, where the end of one form lines up in relation to another. You know, the direction that form is turning.
And then later on, you're going to start refining it.
Yeah. But realize the refinement stage of the drawing might be a while before you get to that. I think, like I was saying earlier, sometimes people rush to that too soon.
Now, we're using, for our self-portrait project, are we using chalk pastels?
Yeah, yeah. We're just doing some practice runs with the tone paper. We'll be doing it just like we do off of the model in a week or two. I have a Houston hat you can wear for yours.
That's great, that deserve it. After everything they've been through.
Well, when the Cardinals lost to the Cubs in the playoffs in 2015, I was saying quite a few colorful words when that happened.
Yeah, were you?
Yes,
I'm
I
pretty
was.
sure.
Could be worse. The Giants could have beat them.
That's even worse. I really hate the color orange now.
And for demo reasons, I'm probably going a little faster than I normally would. But I'm still thinking of the same things I would normally do. I just maybe applying them a little bit quicker. Without a reference to all of the overall mass of the head, I can start to little by little working to some reference of some of these smaller forms. But keep in mind that I still may need to adjust things I've put down earlier. So if I make light marks, I can leave myself enough room to adjust when I find that something is off. And in this particular case, the line of the eyes is not exactly in the middle of the head because of the tilt. So I measure and adjust accordingly. See a little less of the left side of her mouth than the right side because of that three-quarter view. So I've already made a reference to the right and left side. Notice my hand is constantly moving from one area of the head to another. So every decision I make, I want to make sure and see how it relates back to the head as a whole. And even though I haven't applied value yet, the fact that I have all these references to where the forms are changing, that will help later on when I'm ready to think about value, because value changes as the forms change. And I see a lot of the left side of the head, the back of the head, or towards the back of the head as well. Sometimes what people do when they end in that situation is they end up focusing a lot on the face and they don't focus enough on that back of the head that they see. Remember, they all have to equally kind of work together. So that's why I'm continually going to the right and left side, top versus bottom. And remember to keep your pencil sharp. So I'm blocking in some of the shape of the glasses, which in the center can help kind of distinguish the top plane from the side plane on the head. Like I say, I'm not actually drawing a box, but I am thinking in those box-like relationships as I try to resolve shapes and changes. A little bit of a form shift along the change of the chin to the side plane. You doing okay? You're actually holding it better than a lot of the professional models we have. Just now referencing some of the eye, but again, it's just a reference. may also go back and recheck previous measurements as I'm moving ahead. See if they're in the right spot, to use them to find new areas. Make any adjustments should I have mismeasured something. And keep in mind how much concentration this requires. So when you're posing for somebody, don't start talking and you're breaking their concentration or doing things that'll break their concentration. And as you, being the person that's drawing, don't say things that will break the concentration of somebody who's trying to pose for you, or do things that'll break their concentration. Posing for somebody is it looks a lot easier than it actually is. I'm making some value references to some of these planes, but with minor pressure, so I can, I guess I change if I have to. And I'm only blocking in value to areas that are generally darker than middle value. Things that are around the middle value range, I can leave the tone of the paper. I think I kind of talked about that earlier in the semester when we were doing those practice drawings. As I'm blocking in the area for the hair, I'm thinking about, again, that area as a whole bulk. I'm not thinking of individual strands of hair. So avoid the Homer Simpson approach to hair. You draw individual strands. And what I think I'm going to do on Wednesday when you guys pair up, you'll have half the class will be you posing for somebody, the other half will be somebody posing for you. is probably a stage where I can start to move into some of the smaller shapes a little more specifically. And if it takes you a while to get to a stage where you're ready to move into the smaller ones, let it take you a while. Again, I'm drawing a little bit faster than I normally would. You want to take a break? Or are you okay?
Here?
Okay. And remember, every couple of seconds, look back up at what you're drawing. Don't get so involved in any one area that you forget the answers to resolving the area that you're working on are really right in front of you. Like I say, I'm kind of moving back and forth from areas of the head to the glasses, trying to think of the glasses as being part of the head rather than something overly separate. And we'll take a break here in a second. And as I hatch in marks to slowly start to work up those forms, I'm thinking of the direction that plane might be changing. Turning down, turning over, moving upward, what direction is it going? Why don't we take a quick break, and we'll come back. All right, so first thing I'm going to do, everybody paying attention? First thing I'm going to do when I go back is check a few things, see if there's anything I want to adjust, rather than going right into like any particular area and starting to work it up. I'm also going to see if there's any adjustments I need to do on her pose. So. I think something that somebody just asked me, which I think is a very valid question, is in the beginning, I was starting out holding my pencil like this. Now I'm holding it like this. So why am I changing the way I'm holding it? When I'm holding it like this, it's usually in the bigger, earlier stages where I want to think of broad, large relationships. But when I'm ready to start to slowly move down to smaller shapes, then I can hold it in a way to where it's easier to kind of start carving those little shapes. So I wouldn't start the drawing holding it like this. Otherwise, I might end up zooming in too close too soon. And a lot of the things that I was talking about in terms of structural issues and alignments and all that, at a certain point you find yourself thinking about those things, but it's kind of in a more fluid manner. In other words, the way I'm talking to you guys isn't necessarily I'm not thinking those words in my head, but I'm thinking about those concepts and those issues in my head. And something it's kind of premature because I haven't got into any of the lighter values yet, but the whites of the eyes are not white because the eyeball is inside the eye socket with an eyelid over top. So it's lighter than maybe the pupil, but not quite as light as you might initially think.
Not doing any coloring, right?
Not yet. We will have a model coming in a week or two where we will be working in color, but we're just dealing with the structure right now. Sometimes I might get involved in the drawing where I'm not saying much, so if you have a question, by all means, just shout it out. Don't think think you can't ask a question while I'm drawing. Turn your head just a slight bit that way. Yeah, there you go.
For this assignment, we're just focusing on the head.
For what we're doing right now, yeah. Your self-portrait isn't a full figure self-portrait. Unless you're really inspired to do a full figure self-portrait. I did have somebody in one class do a full figure self-portrait.
How did I do?
Well, it was a little bit scary because they decided to do a nude full figure self-portrait. So it was sort of odd when they brought it into the final day to show everybody, but to their credit, they did actually a pretty good job. So,
Make sure they didn't, emphasize certain things a little too much.
no. So I'm using every little shift in value I see in these planes to help me identify plane shifts. Like I say, if there's a value change, that must mean to some degree there's a plane change. might up in a little bit of the light values, or lighter values. But I'm only going to start going slightly above the value of the paper, not a lot. And if I put it down and realize it's too light, then I'm going to stop and take it out. The other thing I'm going to make sure not to do is not to mix the white and black pencil.
How do you approach creating a glass effect on the glasses?
I just think of the value shift that's on it. That's ultimately, essentially that glass effect is a lot of contrast of values rather than any specific technique. So if I just look at the way the values are shifting in relation to one another, that ultimately in the end will start to get the feeling of the glass being there. Sort of like the reflective spheres that we had in the still life. Essentially, it's a lot of different values close to one another, varied edges.
I noticed you did another shade on the hair at the left, but you stopped it halfway.
Oh, I'm going to add more to it later. I might have said this when some of you were drawing the skull. I think the same thing is true for the head, which is going to sound weird based on everything I've just talked about today. But try not to get overly caught up with the fact that you're drawing a head, and try to think more about basic form, basic alignment. And I know that sounds odd because I've been talking about these specific aspects of the head, but if you get overly caught up with, oh, it's a head, I need to approach it in such a dramatically different way, then you might, without wanting to, revert back to drawing some stereotypes about a head that might not apply to the situation that you're in. Like I say, as I add this white pencil in, I'm only doing it into the areas that are initially much lighter, and I'm only adding a very minor amount to start off with, just slightly above the value of the paper. If I find that it, for whatever reason, doesn't work, I stop and I take it out, I erase it out. Key to working on a toned surface is to let the tone of that surface do a lot of the work for you. if I'm in doubt of whether your white pencil needs to go someplace, then I leave it out. I'd say err on the side of not having it in rather than putting too much down. In this area, I've got a lot, relatively a lot of light on the front plane relative to some of the other forms, but not necessarily super light, just light relatively speaking. So I'm putting light down, but I'm doing it with minimal pressure, so I don't make it too light. Starting to bounce back and forth from some of the darker values to some of the lighter values, but I'm doing that little by little. And little by little, I will gradually push some of the edges as they need it. But you'll notice most of this drawing is stayed somewhat with softer edges rather than harder edges as it's worked through. I'm just now referencing some hard edges. One of the reasons for that is if I find that something was off, if it's not too hard of an edge, it's easier to erase it back out and change it. If I jump to too hard of an edge too soon, then it's going to be a lot more work to take it out and change it. One of the reasons, like I say, that I push this or stress the issue of the importance of paying attention to plane changes as I start hatching in and refining these changes along the forms and the value shift. If I'm conscious of the direction the plane is turning, it gives me an idea on which direction to make my hatch marks to reinforce that form. I said earlier, I'm not, building up the value of the hair in several passes, not worrying about nailing it in one shot. And I would say that probably applies to every area that I'm drawing, not worrying about nailing the value in one shot, but building it up. Like I said, I want to leave myself open to adjustments as long as I possibly can.
When do you go in and start creating those curvatures on our hair?
What's that?
When do you go in and then create those curvatures on our hair?
You're talking about in here?
Mm-hmm.
I might even leave those out, given how minor the contrast of value is on that side.
Are you going to use the white charcoal?
No. There's nothing on this side that would need that.
Like, you see like those little highlights right there?
Maybe.
Like kind of like shift, or maybe I'm just seeing if.
No, I see what you're talking about, but if you look at that area and you compare it to the values on the right side, you'll notice the stuff on the right side is significantly lighter than anything on that side. Yeah. And from where I'm sitting, I have a very minor contrast on that side, so I'm going to leave it probably that first pass, or that initial overall value, rather than trying to overemphasize it. If anything, I see something light on the hair, I'd probably leave it at the tone of the paper at its lightest, because she has naturally dark colored hair. I would say that for any kind of naturally dark colored subject matter, if it's a dark bottle or anything dark in a landscape, you'll notice those areas look lighter because what's immediately next to it is so much darker. So yeah, if you have somebody with dark hair, the last thing you want to do is put a whole bunch of white pencil into the hair.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you want to make the hair look gray. In the ear, I'm not going to overemphasize. I'm going to draw a bigger shape of value, but the ear is kind of suppressed in shadow in this particular setup, so I'm going to draw it accordingly. Again, I don't want to go just because I know it's an ear that I overemphasize it. Hopefully, you guys posing for each other will give you guys a new respect for the model. You're going to find that it's not, like I say, not very easy. Sitting there in one position for a while is hard to do. You want to take one more quick break and then we can finish it? Yeah. We'll take. Like I said, I go back and I just take a quick check at the beginning of every session that I'm where I need to be. Oh, you're good. And my advice for Wednesday, obviously you're not going to get as worked up on the drawing as you would if you had all 3 hours, because you're going to have an hour and a half that you're posing and an hour and a half that you're drawing. But I want you to very slowly and carefully resolve any problems rather than trying to rush the drawing, because the whole point of doing these practice drawings in class is to get a practice on how to handle a problem like this, so when we do get to the long pose that will go over several class sessions from the model, that you know how to approach that, right? Not that you're trying to just rush it just for the sake of getting it done. If I was doing this drawing for myself, I'd probably still be at the stage where I'm just carefully blocking in shapes. Realize building up certain forms will just be, in a lot of ways, the result of slowly working back through an area many times throughout the whole course of the drawing.
What were you saying about like if someone had like dark hair color, you were supposed to...
The lighter areas, what appear to be the lighter areas of the dark hair, I wouldn't use the white pencil for it.
Just leave it as paper?
At its very lightest, maybe it'll be the gray of the paper in an area that's getting hit with a lot of light. Yeah, if the person you're drawing has dark hair, then you don't want to put a bunch of white pencil in there, otherwise you're probably going to create too much contrast. If you look at the lightest area of the dark hair, you'll notice it's still darker than some of the lighter areas of the face itself. Usually the problem that comes of somebody putting white pencil in the darker valued hair is that they're only looking at that one area. And then they end up miscuing the value range. Say every few marks, every few things that you do, gradually go back and look at your subject every few seconds. And if there are areas of the head that you know to be there, but you don't see them because of the way the head's turned, then don't try to draw them. In other words, I know that she has a tear duct on this one side, but she's turned in such a perspective to where I don't see it from this point of view. So I'm not going to try and overemphasize something that I actually don't even see from where I'm set up. I should expect everybody's final self-portraits to be really good, though. We have an extra hour because of the time change. Right?
That probably works for like the first day.
Not if you don't forget, if you leave your clocks the same. It works the whole time. Believe it or not, I have had students in the fall be late to class and claim it was the time change is the reason they were late. Realizing they should actually be early if the time change is what they didn't pay attention to. And in reference to what somebody was asking earlier about the glasses, I'm looking at now the reflected slightly lighter values. Where was he? He was asking about the glasses. You paying attention?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm starting to put in the a little bit.
The highlights?
I don't want to call them highlights, just slightly lighter values in relation to what's there. Reflections, yeah, they're not super light. They're just lighter than what's immediately around them. So if I refer to them as a highlight, usually that ends up make them even lighter than they should be. Because if I take a scrap of this paper and I put a really light value, you can tell that nothing up there is really super white. It's lighter relative to what's around it. Okay? That's why I say err on the side of leaving it the tone of the paper rather than rushing to using white pencil everywhere. Let that be one of the last things you put in.
Very minimal.
Do you need a white pencil?
No, I'm good. This will be okay. If you feel like you're too heavy-handed, which you could do, I think I mentioned this early in the semester, but have a little scrap sheet next to you, and you can practice some marks if you think you're going accidentally too heavy on the marks, with the white pencil especially.
So no need to put a light source on the face.
Well, we have this light source. And I've turned off this middle strip on purpose to kind of give it a little more contrast, which I'll probably do on...
So we do the same at home.
No, home will be slightly different. I'm going to show you guys how to set up at home. Oop.
Good.
That one, is that?
Yeah, probably sometime next week I'll do something that one of my old teachers told me was insane to do. And I'm going to actually do a self-portrait demonstration in class.
Self-portrait.
They told me it was insane to do that because what if you screw up? Well, when you screw up.
So you're going to draw yourself?
Yeah, because I want you guys to see how to set up at home, because in the past I've had people do self-portraits, and a lot of the problems they had were rooted in the way that they set themselves up and the way they went about starting their drawing. So, not that I'm obsessed with drawing myself, that's the last thing I'm But hey, even if I screw it up, you figure out what not to do. You know?
Like learning from an older sibling. I get in trouble, I don't do that.
I did know of a teacher in my old graduate school that gave a portrait demo, and for whatever reason, the portrait demo did not go the way she wanted it. And in front of the whole class she was teaching, she grabbed a sheet off the board and she tore it up out of frustration. So, learn what not to do. Don't tear up your drawing out of frustration. Yep.
Does it have involve a singular light source?
Yes, it will. I'll have a handout, and I'm going to give it, like I say, a full explanation on how to go about starting it. And you'll be doing it in color as well. Because this is second level drawing, obviously, and we're dealing with color.
Put it onto the paper.
On the gray board. So, I could probably spend another few hours working up subtleties here, but if I wanted to do a worked up pastel drawing of this pose, like I say, I could go and make a copy, a Xerox copy of this at like a FedEx or wherever, and then transfer that back to my board. And if I were to get in trouble in the actual drawing on the board, I could have something to transfer back to, and I'd have a reference also of the pose. Plus, I will have worked through a few potential problematic areas and already have a strategy on how to approach them. Because every pose you do, every drawing you do is going to present different problems than the last one. You could do a bunch of drawings of the same person, and each one of them is going to have a different set of problems depending on the situation that you're in. Oh, and one thing when you're lifting out some of the white pencil, you notice I'm tapping it, I'm not smearing it like that, otherwise it can create this kind of cloudy mess on your drawing. Are there any questions about anything? Because like I say, this is basically what we're going to be doing on Wednesday. Anything that I did that doesn't make sense? Anything you have questions about for next class? And you guys know what materials to bring on Wednesday, right?
So which parts would you leave white and which parts would you leave as a tone of the paper again?
Basically, I would leave everything that you think is the middle to lighter value. Leave it the tone of the paper. So work up your drawing as far as you can, leaving the light areas the tone of the paper, and you go to the white pencil towards the end. When you start working up the other values and you realize there's no other way to get that area to look light other than add white pencil. But like I say, when I add the white pencil, I'm only going slightly lighter than the paper initially. I'm not going, super light in the beginning. So, and if I put that next to it, you'll see that's lighter than anything on the face. It's even lighter than anything that's down there. So treat that white pencil just like you would a black pencil in the sense that varying amounts of pressure create different values.